The sound wasn't fabric tearing. It was bone cracking, the sickening snap of a man's career splitting down the middle. Sergeant Derek Wolfe didn't know it yet. His meaty fingers still clutched the navy silk, ripping downward with the savage satisfaction of a predator exposing prey. The dress screamed. Not the woman. Just the silk a sound like paper shredding in a church, obscene and final. The fabric peeled from collarbone to navel, exposing the white slip beneath, the lace of her bra, the dark skin of her stomach. The evening sun painted everything in shades of amber and blood, making the violation look almost beautiful, almost biblical, a public crucifixion on the shoulder of Interstate 85. Dr. Cassandra Monroe didn't scream, didn't flinch, didn't give Wolfe the satisfaction of a single goddamn tear. She stood there, hands at her sides, her spine a rod of iron, her face carved from something colder than marble. Her eyes dark, intelligent, absolutely devoid of fear locked onto his. She wasn't looking at him like a victim looks at her attacker. She was looking at him the way a scientist looks at a specimen pinned under glass. Wolfe's breath came in harsh, excited gasps. Stale coffee. Marlboro Reds. The sour tang of someone who enjoyed his power a little too much. His face was flushed, mottled purple with exertion and righteousness. Behind him, his partner officer Marcus Hayes, younger, leaner, a hyena to Wolfe's lion laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine one. The kind that said this wasn't the first time. Wouldn't be the last. "Trash like you," Wolfe panted, his thick finger jabbing toward her exposed skin. "Needs to learn respect." Cars slowed on the highway. Headlights swept across the scene like searchlights at a crime scene, which, technically, it was. Phones rose in the gathering dusk. Witnesses, evidence, a dozen pairs of eyes devouring her humiliation, feeding on it. Some would post it online, some would drive past, grateful it wasn't them. None would stop. No one ever stopped. But Cassandra Monroe wasn't counting on witnesses. She was counting seconds. She was counting badge W2847, stitched in gold thread above Wolfe's left breast pocket. She was counting the beads of sweat on his upper lip, the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes kept darting to the passing traffic, feeding off the attention, high on his own untouchability. She was counting evidence. Wolfe shoved her, hard. Her back collided with the hood of her sedan, a modest gray Toyota that had seen better years. The metal was still warm from the engine, scorching through the thin slip, branding her skin. Pain flared. She absorbed it, converted it, filed it away in the cold, calculating vault of her mind where emotions went to die and strategy was born. "You understand me now?" Wolfe growled, leaning in close, invading every inch of her space. His breath washed over her face like toxic fog. "You understand your place?" Cassandra looked up at him. Her voice, when it came, was steady, clinical. The voice of someone lecturing to a classroom of students. "I understand perfectly, Sergeant." Something flickered in Wolfe's eyes. Confusion, the tiniest spark of unease. Her calmness unsettled him. It wasn't natural, wasn't right. Victims were supposed to break. They were supposed to cry, to beg, to apologize for existing in his world. This woman, this black woman in a torn dress on the side of his highway, wasn't playing her part. Behind them, Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Derek, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Wolfe snapped. He turned back to Cassandra, trying to reclaim control. "Get in the car. You're under arrest." "On what charge?" Her tone didn't change, didn't rise, didn't crack. "Resisting arrest. Assaulting an officer. Take your pick." "I haven't resisted anything, Sergeant Wolfe." She tilted her head slightly, a small, cold smile touching her lips. "I've been perfectly compliant, but please continue. I want to make sure you're thorough." That smile, that fucking smile. It wormed under Wolf's skin like a parasite. He grabbed her arm too tight, fingers digging into flesh hard enough to bruise, and hauled her toward the cruiser. She didn't resist, didn't fight. She moved like water, fluid and inevitable, letting him think he was in control. As he shoved her into the back seat, her head deliberately lowered, her body deliberately compliant, Cassandra Munro allowed herself one small luxury. She closed her eyes. Not in defeat, in countdown. Derek Wolfe had just stripped a woman on a public highway. What he'd actually done was hand Special Agent Cassandra Munro, DOJ Civil Rights Division, Operation Broken Badge, 16 months deep in the most comprehensive corruption investigation in Georgia state history, the rope for his own hanging. She memorized his badge number. 2847. She memorized the mole above his left eyebrow, the scar on his knuckles. The way his service weapon sat slightly crooked in his holster, because he wore it low, gunslinger style, like he was playing cowboy in the Wild West instead of terrorizing civilians on a taxpayer-funded salary. In 47 minutes, none of it would matter. In 47 minutes, badge number 2847 would be nothing but evidence in a federal case. In 47 minutes, Derek Wolfe would learn that the woman he'd just humiliated wasn't prey. She was the hunter, and she'd just watched him step into a trap that had been 16 months in the making. The cruiser door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Through the cage separating the back seat from the front, Cassandra watched Wolfe and Hayes high-five, their laughter muffled but unmistakable. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd put another uppity black woman in her place. They had no idea they'd just committed career suicide on camera. 17:30. Hours. Emory University campus. Dusk bled across the Atlanta skyline, staining the clouds the color of old bruises. Dr. Cassandra Munro stood at the podium in Emory's Walton Auditorium, wrapping up her lecture to a room of 200 law students and junior prosecutors. The title slide behind her glowed white against the dimming light. Police brutality and federal oversight, when local law becomes federal crime. The question isn't whether corruption exists, Cass said, her voice carrying effortlessly to the back row. The question is whether we have the courage to prosecute it when it's wearing a badge. Applause rippled through the auditorium. She nodded, smiled the professional smile that never quite reached her eyes, and gathered her notes. 45 minutes later, she was in her Cara 2018 Toyota Camry, gray, unremarkable, the kind of car that disappears in traffic. Exactly the point. She drove south, leaving the manicured lawns and Gothic architecture of Emory behind. The transition was gradual but unmistakable. Decatur to Buckhead, black to white, cracked pavement to smooth asphalt, liquor stores to boutique wine shops, the invisible border that every person of color in Atlanta knew by heart, even if no map acknowledged its existence. Cass's fingers tightened on the wheel, not from fear, from anticipation. For 16 months, Operation Broken Badge had been circling Derek Wolfe like a shark scenting blood in the water. They had the data, they had the financial records, they had testimony from a dozen victims too terrified to go public. What they didn't have was the smoking gun. The undeniable, irrefutable, caught-on-camera evidence that would survive every legal challenge, every he said, she said, every defense attorney's attempt to shred credibility. Tonight, they were getting it. Beneath her navy silk dress, professional, elegant, the kind a doctor or lawyer might wear for devices hummed silently. A wire mic, no bigger than a shirt button, adhered to her skin just below her collarbone. Waterproof, tamper-proof. Broadcasting every word, every breath, every sound to a DOJ command center 8 miles away. Her car had been retrofitted with 4 hidden cameras, dash-mounted, side mirrors, rear window, one embedded in the headrest. 4K resolution, 360-degree coverage. Nothing would be missed. Her sedan glided through the invisible border between Decatur and Buckhead. The checkpoint materialized ahead like a tumor on the highway, flashing lights, traffic cones, 3 cruisers forming a choke point. It was unofficial, unsanctioned, a safety initiative that Councilman Robert Finch had championed, selling it as crime prevention. What it actually was, a gauntlet designed to keep certain people out of certain neighborhoods. Derek Wolfe ran this checkpoint 3 nights a week. His record was flawless. 17 complaints filed, 0 upheld. He was untouchable, protected. A symptom of a disease so deep in the department that cutting out one tumor wouldn't cure the cancer. But it was a start. Cass's phone buzzed. A single text from Agent Lena Park, her second in command. All systems green. We're watching. She didn't reply. Just slipped the phone into the center console and kept driving. Her heart rate was 72 BPM, steady, controlled. The same rate she maintained when testifying before Congress, the same rate she'd clocked when diving in the Caymans last summer. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford tonight. The checkpoint loomed. 2 cars ahead of her got waved through both Mercedes, both white drivers. Standard, predictable. When her Camry pulled up, Officer Marcus Hayes stepped into the light. Young, eager, the kind of cop who'd do anything to impress the senior officers, the kind who'd back any story, no matter how rotten. But it wasn't Hayes who stepped to her window. It was Wolfe, Sergeant Derek Wolfe, 18 years on the force, 42 years old, 6'2", 240 pounds of entitlement, wrapped in a blue uniform. His face was fleshy, permanently flushed, the complexion of a man who drank too much and exercised too little. His eyes small, pale, mean-swept over her car before landing on her face. And there it was, the look, the assessment, the instant judgment that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with skin color, gender, and the fact that she was in his territory without permission. Sirens erupted behind her. Not a request, a command. "Ma'am, pull over to the shoulder." Cass's lips curved into the faintest smile. Not from joy, from recognition. The trap was springing. Right on schedule, she pulled over. Smooth, professional, hands at 10 and 2. In the rearview mirror, Wolfe's silhouette emerged, a bull in a uniform, backlit by the cruiser's flashing lights. He didn't approach. He stalked, each step deliberate, predatory. This was his kingdom, his rules, his jungle where he was apex predator. But tonight, Derek Wolfe wasn't the hunter. He was swimming into a net, and Cassandra Monroe was about to pull it tight. Wolfe's flashlight beam slashed across her face, blinding her, the kind of tactical move designed to disorient, to strip away sight and leave a person vulnerable. Cassandra didn't blink, didn't flinch. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, waiting. License and registration. She reached slowly for the glove compartment, telegraphing every movement. No sudden motions, no excuses. She handed over the documents through the window. Wolfe snatched them, his meaty fingers leaving sweat prints on the laminated card. His eyes caught on the honorific. Dr. Cassandra Monroe. A sneer twisted his face. "Doctor?" He held the license up to Hayes, who drifted closer, hyena curious. "We got ourselves a doctor here, Marcus. Doctor of what? Welfare? Food stamps?" Hayes laughed, not a polite chuckle, a braying, ugly sound that carried across the highway. Cassandra's voice emerged calm, clinical. "Is there a reason for this stop, Sergeant?" "Reason?" Wolfe leaned into her window, his bulk filling the frame. His breath washed over her sour coffee, Marlboro ash, something rotting beneath. "Reason is you were driving erratic, swerving, probably drunk, probably high. Step out of the vehicle." "I decline to consent to any search without probable cause," Cassandra said, each word measured. "Under the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable searches and—" "Did I ask for a law lesson?" Wolfe's voice dropped, dangerous. "Did I ask you to speak?" "I'm asserting my constitutional rights, Sergeant." Fury detonated behind his eyes. That was the spark, the match striking tinder. A black woman in a Toyota quoting the Constitution to him on his highway. The audacity, the disrespect, the sheer fucking nerve. Out of the vehicle, now. Cassandra complied. She opened the door, stepped onto the gravel shoulder. Her heels modest, professional crunched on the loose stones. She stood at her full height, 5'7", spine straight, hands at her sides, non-threatening, textbook compliant. Wolf circled her, a predator assessing prey, his boots scraped on asphalt. Behind them, traffic crawled. Headlights swept across the scene, turning it into a stage, witnesses who'd never testify, phones that would capture and forget. Hands on the hood. She placed her palms on the warm metal of her sedan. The engine heat seeped through her skin. Wolf moved behind her. She heard the leather creak of his duty belt, the metallic jingle of handcuffs shifting position. I'm going to conduct a search for weapons. I do not consent to... His hands landed on her shoulders. Not a pat-down. A violation. His fingers prowled down her sides, lingering at her ribs, sliding too close to her breasts. Sandpaper palms scraping silk. He moved lower, hips, thighs. His touch deliberate, invasive, designed to humiliate rather than search. This is sexual assault, Sergeant Wolf. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack, just stated fact. Wolf froze, his hands stilled on her waist. For 3 seconds, the world held its breath. Then he erupted. Assault? He spun her around, slamming her back against the car. His face was inches from hers, purple with rage, veins bulging at his temples, beads of sweatosterone and fury dotted his forehead. You think you can accuse me? You think that fancy degree protects you? You think those big words make you untouchable? His left hand seized her collar. His right gripped her waist. Fabric bunched in his fists. Trash like you needs to learn respect. He ripped. The sound was obscene, silk screaming, threads snapping like bones. The dress tore from collar to navel, the fabric peeling away in his hands. Navy silk shredded under his knuckles, exposing white slip, black lace, brown skin. The violence was intimate, public, absolute. Cassandra didn't scream, didn't fight. She calcified into marble, her face expressionless, her body rigid. Only her eyes moved, tracking haze, tracking the phones in passing cars, tracking the body cam on Wolf's chest that blinked red, capturing everything. Wolf panted, chest heaving, the torn fabric dangling from his fist like a trophy. Around them, cars slowed to a crawl. Windows descended. Phones rose, their cameras hungry for spectacle. But Wolf saw none of it. He saw only hair a black woman in a slip and bra on the side of his highway, stripped bare by his hand. He'd made his point. He'd put her in her place. He'd shown everyone what happened when you disrespected Sergeant Derek Wolf. What he'd actually done was strip away his own immunity. Every second was being captured in 4K. The DOJ was watching, and Cassandra Monroe was counting his breaths, counting his crimes, counting down to the moment when his world would collapse. Badge number 2847 had 39 minutes of authority left. Fulton County Sheriff's Office. 21:30 hours. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the bullpen in sickly yellow. The precinct smelled of burnt coffee, industrial cleaner, and the stale sweat of men who'd learned that the rules didn't apply to them. Sergeant Derek Wolf sat at his scarred metal desk, two thick fingers hunting and pecking at a keyboard that had seen better decades. He was forging a masterpiece of perjury. Officer Marcus Hayes perched on the edge of the desk, swigging lukewarm Mountain Dew, watching his partner work. Man, you should have seen her face when you ripped that dress. He laughed, a corroding sound that ate at the air like acid. Thought she was gonna cry. Then nothing. Weird-ass bitch. Wolf grunted, not looking up. His tongue poked from the corner of his mouth as he typed. It's an act. They all do it. Act calm, act educated, then scream about their rights and sue the department. He jabbed the enter key with finality. I've seen it 100 times. The report materialized on screen, each line a carefully constructed lie. Suspect identified as Cassandra Monroe became verbally abusive and physically aggressive after being stopped for reckless driving. Subject refused lawful commands and made threatening gestures toward officers. When Officer Wolf attempted to detain suspect for public safety, subject lunged at officer, necessitating defensive restraint. Subject's clothing was damaged during struggle as she resisted arrest. It was poetry. Bureaucratic, bulletproof poetry. The kind that had cleared Wolf 17 times before. "What are we charging her with?" Hayes asked. Wolf's fingers danced across the keys. "Resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, assault on a law enforcement officer." He paused, a gleam entering his pale eyes. "And let's add, suspected narcotics possession. I smelled marijuana in the vehicle." Hayes blinked. We found residue," Wolf corrected, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You remember that, right, Marcus? You were there. You saw it. You smelled it." A beat. Then Hayes nodded slowly. Yeah, I smelled it too." Desk Sergeant Murphy, 63 years old, face like a collapsed road map. Retirement 6 months away, shuffled over. His uniform strained over a gut built on 20 years of donuts and looking the other way. "What you got, Derek?" "Another troublemaker," Wolf said, leaning back in his chair. The springs squeaked like dying mice. "Pulled her over on 85, mouthy, entitled. Thinks she's better than everyone, had to put her in her place." Murphy glanced at the screen, nodded once. He didn't ask for details. Didn't question the assault charge. Didn't wonder why a woman with a doctorate and no priors would suddenly attack 2 armed cops on a highway. His job was to process paperwork, not truth. "Her car?" "Impounded," Hayes chimed in. "Searched it top to bottom. Found nothing, but the report says probable cause based on her behavior and the smell." "Good." Murphy's voice was gravel and indifference. "Keep these troublemakers off our streets." He lumbered back to his desk, the conversation already forgotten. Wolf finished typing with a flourish. He described how Dr. Monroe had screamed obscenities, had threatened his family, had adopted an aggressive fighting stance that forced him to use necessary force to protect public safety. The dress? Torn accidentally during her violent resistance. He read it over. Perfect. Airtight. Another masterpiece in a career built on them. He clicked Submit. The screen blinked. Report filed successfully. Holding cell B, same time. Cassandra Monroe sat on a metal bench bolted to the wall. The cell was small, beige walls, concrete floor, a smell of urine and desperation that no amount of bleach could erase. They'd given her a thin gray blanket. She'd draped it over her shoulders, covering the torn dress. Cell walls, beige, bench, cold, blanket, threadbare. But Cass wasn't counting discomforts. She was counting crimes. Assault under color of law? Check. False arrest? Check. Fabricated evidence? Check. Sexual assault? Check. Conspiracy? Check. Perjury in official report? Check. Derek Wolf had just built his own electric chair. Federal offense by federal offense. And Cassandra Monroe was going to flip the switch in 31 minutes. She closed her eyes, meditated. Her breathing slowed to 6 breaths per minute. Her heart rate dropped to 58 BPM. In the cold, calculating vault of her mind, she reviewed the operation. Every word captured, every action filmed from 5 angles, the wire mic under her slip still broadcasting, the hidden cameras in her car still recording. 8 miles away, in a DOJ command center disguised as a corporate office building, Agent Lena Park was watching everything, recording everything, building a case so airtight that no defense attorney on earth could crack it. Outside the cell, She heard Wolf's voice, loud, triumphant. "Should have seen this bitch, Murphy. Thought she could quote the Constitution at me. Like I give a fuck what some Supreme Court said 50 years ago. This is my street." Laughter, crude, casual. The sound of men who'd never faced consequences. Cassandra opened her eyes. They were dry, clear. The eyes of a woman who'd just watched a man hang himself and was simply waiting for gravity to finish the job. Wolf finished typing. He clicked submit with the finality of a nail in a coffin. He didn't know that on the other end, in a DOJ bunker 8 miles away, Agent Lena Park was reading every word. The report was perfect, perfectly damning, perfectly federal. Every lie was being documented. Every fabrication was being cataloged. And in 29 minutes, Derek Wolf's phone would ring, and his world would end. Interrogation Room 2, 22:47 hours. The room reeked of fear-old sweat baked into concrete, ammonia cleaner that couldn't mask decades of desperation. Detective Roy Brennan entered first, a file folder tucked under his arm. Behind him, Detective Sophia Reyes carried 2 styrofoam cups of water, their sides already sweating condensation. They were decent cops, tired, worn down by the machinery they served, but decent. Cassandra sat perfectly still, the gray blanket draped over her torn dress. Her posture hadn't shifted in 40 minutes, spine straight, hands folded, eyes forward. She looked like a woman waiting for a business meeting, not a suspect facing felony charges. Brennan slid into the chair across from her. Reyes took the seat beside him. The file folder landed on the steel table with a soft thud. "Dr. Monroe." Brennan's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd worked too many late shifts. "I'm Detective Brennan. This is Detective Reyes. We need to discuss the events of this evening." Cassandra nodded once, said nothing. Brennan opened the folder. Wolf's report stared up at him, each lie pristine and official. "According to Sergeant Wolf's statement, you were driving erratically. When stopped, you became verbally abusive and physically aggressive. You lunged at Officer Wolf, necessitating defensive restraint. Is that accurate?" "No." Cassandra's voice was calm, clinical. "Every word of that report is false." Reyes leaned forward, her pen poised over a notepad. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Monroe. You're saying 2 sworn officers are lying?" "I'm saying Sergeant Wolf committed perjury in an official document. Officer Hayes corroborated that perjury. Yes, Detective, they're lying." Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I understand you're upset. What happened to your dress? Let's discuss your dashcam footage." Cassandra's interruption was surgical. "It's cloud-synced, correct? Per the 2021 federal grant requirements for real-time evidence backup?" Silence crashed into the room like a tidal wave. Reyes's pen trembled. "How do you—" "Your body cameras," Cassandra continued, her tone never rising, never wavering. "Also cloud-synced, tamper-proof. Every frame, every audio file uploaded to off-site servers within 30 seconds of recording. The footage will show I made no aggressive movement. None. It will show Sergeant Wolf's hands on my body. It will show him tearing my dress. Every single second." Brennan's face went slack. The salt stink of panic began to seep from his pores. "And then there's Sergeant Wolf's complaint history." Cassandra tilted her head slightly. 23 complaints filed against him in 7 years. 19 dismissed internally. All filed by minorities, all alleging excessive force or racial bias. The color drained from Reyes's face. That information is confidential personnel records." "It is," Cassandra agreed. "So you have to ask yourselves, detectives, how does a suspect in a holding cell know the exact number of internal complaints against the arresting officer?" She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Brennan's. "Are you certain you want your names attached to his perjury? Are you certain you want to be accessories to a federal civil rights violation?" Oxygen thinned. Pressure mounted. The walls seemed to contract. Brennan stood abruptly, His chair screeched metal on concrete, a dying animal sound. He looked at Cassandra, and for the first time he didn't see a suspect. He saw a bomb, ticking, about to detonate. "I need to call the chief." Cassandra smiled, thin, cold, a blade wrapped in silk. "You might want to hurry, Detective. My team arrives in 11 minutes. Chief Raymond Garrett burst through the door like a bull entering an arena. 58 years old, silver hair, jaw like a cinder block. 3 decades in law enforcement, 20 years in leadership, zero tolerance for civilians who didn't know their place. He saw a black woman in a torn dress and a cheap blanket. He saw a problem to be managed. "I'm Chief Garrett," his voice boomed, designed to intimidate. "I understand you've been giving my detectives a hard time, making accusations, threatening federal action." He crossed his arms, biceps straining his uniform. "Let me be clear. You assaulted one of my officers. That's a felony. You're looking at serious time." Cassandra looked at him. Not up at him, she remained seated, forcing him to loom, to overplay his hand. "The only assault committed tonight, Chief, was by Sergeant Wolf, against me." Garrett's laugh was short, dismissive. "That's not what the official report says." "Official reports can be wrong." Cassandra's hands moved to her small handbag, the one they'd searched and returned. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. She placed her wallet on the steel table. Black leather, worn edges, ordinary. But her fingers lingered on it. The room held its breath. "For 16 months, Cassandra said, her voice quiet but filling every corner of the room. "The Department of Justice has been investigating this precinct. Operation Broken Badge, racial profiling, illegal seizures, perjury, conspiracy under color of law." "That's ridiculous." But Garrett's voice cracked, just slightly. Cassandra flipped the wallet open. Gold metal glinted under the fluorescent lights. The seal of the Department of Justice. The words etched in black, Special Agent. "My name is Special Agent Cassandra Monroe. I'm the lead investigator for the DOJ Civil Rights Division." Her voice remained level, calm. A surgeon describing an incision. "And Sergeant Derek Wolf just committed aggravated assault against a federal agent during an authorized undercover operation." Color drained from Garrett's face, not slowly, but all at once, like water from a slit wrist. His hand fumbled for the wall, fingers scrabbling for purchase. Brennan staggered backward, gut-punched by reality. Reyes's jaw unhinged, a strangled sound escaping her throat. Garrett's mouth worked soundlessly. His eyes darted from the badge to Cassandra's face, to the torn dress that was no longer evidence of a crime against her. It was Exhibit A in a federal case against him, his department, his career. This isn't." Words died in his throat. Cassandra stood, slowly, deliberately. The blanket fell away, revealing the full extent of the damage, a silk hanging in tatters, skin exposed, humiliation weaponized into evidence. "You have 2 options, Chief." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Give me my phone so I can call my team, or wait for them to breach your front door with federal warrants." She glanced at her watch. "Either way, this building becomes a federal crime scene in 4 minutes. Garrett's hand trembled as he reached for his radio. But he was already 3 minutes too late. The sound came first. Thump, thump, thump. Helicopter rotors. Low, close. The windows rattled in their frames. Then came the screech of tires rubber burning asphalt, violent and immediate. Through the precinct windows, black Suburbans flooded the parking lot like a biblical plague. Doors exploded open. Tactical gear spilled out. Gold letters blazed under sodium lights. DOJ. "Federal agents, nobody move!" The command detonated through the building. Local officers froze mid-motion, hands shooting up, weapons staying holstered, faces draining of color as their world inverted. Agent Lena Park entered Interrogation Room 2 first. Korean-American, 5'4", 120 pounds of compressed fury in tactical gear. Her eyes swept the room chief Garrett plastered against the wall. Two detectives looking shell-shocked, and Cassandra standing in a torn dress like a war memorial. "Ma'am, status?" "Operational." Cassandra's voice was crisp, professional. "Secure Sergeant Wolf and Officer Hayes. Separate holding cells. No communication." "Copy." Park spoke into her radio. Orders rippled outward. An agent appeared with a garment bag. Cassandra took it, disappeared into the small bathroom. 30 seconds later, she emerged transformed. Black tactical pants, charcoal button-down, a windbreaker with DOJ Civil Rights Division embroidered in gold. The torn dress was bagged, tagged, cataloged. She was no longer a victim. She was the weapon. The precinct bullpen had become a federal crime scene. Local cops stood with hands on their heads as DOJ agents swarmed computers, evidence lockers, file cabinets. The machine of corruption was being dismantled in real time, and everyone could only watch. Wolf and Hayes were being led through the bullpen in handcuffs, not the loose kind. Federal restraints, steel, unforgiving, final. Wolf saw her, Cassandra Monroe, not in a torn dress, in a tactical jacket, surrounded by federal agents, wearing the authority he'd thought was his alone. His face bleached white, not pale, white, the color of bone. You can't do this!" His voice cracked. "I'm a cop!" Cassandra walked toward him, each step measured. When she stopped, she was close enough that he could smell her perfumed jasmine and steel. "You were a cop, Mr. Wolf." Her voice was quiet, conversational, more devastating than any shout. "Now you're a defendant in a federal civil rights case. There's a difference." The main monitor usually showing traffic cameras now displayed crystal-clear 4K footage. Wolf's own body cam. His voice. "Trash like you needs to learn respect." His hands. Gripping. Tearing. Cassandra's face. Calm. Documenting. Counting. The room gutted itself. Air evacuated. Sound died. Wolf wilted under the screen's glare. His knees buckled. The agents hauled him upright. "Tonight wasn't random," Cassandra announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the precinct. "It was a controlled federal operation. My vehicle contained 4 hidden cameras. I wore a body wire. Your dash cams, your body cams. We've been mirroring every bite to DOJ servers for 16 months. Every stop, every search, every lie." Silence suffocated the precinct. She turned to Chief Garrett, who stood frozen a statue commemorating the death of impunity. "Your career in law enforcement ends tonight, Chief. The only choice you have is handcuffs or a resignation letter." She paused. "I suggest you start writing." Garrett's hand shook as he reached for his desk, but the pen wouldn't work. His fingers had gone numb. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Evidence vans. Mobile command units, news helicopters circling like carrion birds. Operation Broken Badge had just gone public, and Derek Wolf Badge number 2847 was the first domino to fall. United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia, 7 months later. The courtroom smelled of old wood and older, justice-polished oak, leather-bound law books, and the metallic tang of fear that clung to defendants like perfume. High ceilings swallowed sound. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like ash from a funeral pyre. Derek Wolf stood in the defendant's box wearing federal orange. The jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. He'd lost 40 pounds in pre-trial detention. His hands were shackled at the wrists, chains connecting to ankle restraints that clanked with every micro-movement. The sound was rhythmic, final, the percussion of consequences. Judge Patricia Nguyen presided from the bench, her black robes severe against the pale wood. 62 years old, Vietnamese immigrant, federal judge for 18 years. Her face was carved from the same unforgiving stone as the law itself. The gallery was packed, Media in the back rows, cameras banned but notepads hungry. Victims in the front 14 of them, spanning 7 years. Faces Wolf had humiliated. Bodies he'd violated. Lives he'd shattered because he could. Cassandra Monroe sat in the second row. Not front and center, she wasn't here for spectacle. She wore a charcoal suit, her DOJ credentials clipped to her jacket. Her face was impassive, but her eyes tracked everything. Documenting. Always documenting. The prosecution had presented a case so overwhelming that Wolf's defense attorney, a public defender named Chen, who looked like he'd aged a decade in 7 months, had advised a guilty plea. Wolf had refused. Pride, delusion, the desperate belief that the system that had protected him for 18 years wouldn't suddenly turn its back. He'd been wrong. The evidence had gutted him. The 4K footage of the assault played on courthouse monitors, every frame crystal clear. His own body cam audio, trash like you needs to learn respect. Financial records showing $47,000 in unexplained deposits, cash, seized from motorists and never logged. Testimony from Marcus Hayes, who'd flipped for a reduced sentence, detailing years of coordinated harassment. And the victims. 14 of them, emboldened by Cassandra's case, had taken the stand. Their voices shook, but didn't break. They described stops that became shakedowns, searches that became violations, authority that became tyranny. The jury had deliberated for 90 minutes, guilty on all counts. Now came sentencing. Judge Nguyen looked down at Wolf. Her voice, when it came, was surgical, each word a scalpel. Derek Wolf, for 18 years you wore a badge, a symbol meant to inspire trust, to provide protection, to embody justice. She paused. You perverted that symbol. You weaponized it. You twisted law into tyranny and wielded your authority like a cudgel against the very people you swore to serve. Wolf's jaw worked soundlessly. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm. He shook it off. You thought you were untouchable, Judge Nguyen continued. You thought your badge was a shield impenetrable to accountability. You were wrong. This court will show you otherwise. She lifted a document, the sentencing memo. On 17 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 3 counts of aggravated assault, 5 counts of perjury, and 2 counts of conspiracy to obstruct justice, this court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison. No parole, no early release. You will serve every day of that sentence, and when you emerge, if you emerge, you will understand that justice delayed is not justice denied. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. The sound reverberated through the courtroom, through Wolf's chest, through the bones of every person present. It was final, absolute. The sound of a door slamming on a life. A sob tore from Wolf's throat raw, strangled. The sound of a man realizing his world had ended. His legs buckled. The marshals caught him, hauled him upright. Chains clanked as they turned him toward the side exit. His eyes found Cassandra. Not remorse in that gaze, not understanding, only rage impotent, seething, the fury of a predator caged. He still didn't comprehend, still couldn't grasp that she wasn't his downfall. He was. Every choice, every violation, every abuse of power. He'd built his own cage. She'd just locked the door. The marshals dragged him through the exit. The door closed with a hollow boom. Derek Wolf vanished into the federal prison system a ghost, a cautionary tale, a statistic. The aftermath. Marcus Hayes received 5 years for cooperation. He'd serve 3, testify in 4 related cases, and never wear a badge again. Chief Raymond Garrett had resigned within 48 hours of the raid. He was under federal investigation, facing charges of conspiracy and obstruction. His pension 30 years of service was frozen pending trial. 11 other officers were fired, charged, awaiting their own trials. The Fulton County Sheriff's Department was placed under a federal consent decree in years of direct DOJ oversight. Every policy, every procedure, every hire Captain Maria Rodriguez, pulled from narcotics with a spotless 20-year record, became the new chief. Her first act, mandatory training, de-escalation, constitutional rights, bias awareness, the curriculum written by Dr. Cassandra Monroe herself. A civilian oversight board was established with subpoena power, budget authority, and the ability to fire officers without departmental approval. Real power, real teeth. The county settled for $4.2 million, distributed among 47 victims. Money couldn't erase trauma. But it acknowledged harm. It said, officially we were wrong. Justice had a price tag. But for the first time in Fulton County, someone actually paid it. Interstate 85, same stretch, 1 year later. Dusk bled across the Georgia sky, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose. The same colors that had witnessed her humiliation now witnessed her return. Cassandra Monroe stood on the shoulder where Derek Wolfe had ripped her dress. The asphalt was unchanged, cracked, patched, scarred by a million tires, but everything else had shifted. In her hand, a square of navy silk, 10 inches by 10 inches. She'd kept it, not as a trophy, not as a wound, as a reminder. The fabric still bore the tear-jagged line from one corner to the center, the threads frayed and pale. She ran her thumb over it, feeling the damage, the violence fossilized in fiber. But scars weren't signs of weakness. They were proof of survival. Proof that when the system tried to break her open, she hadn't bled out. She'd bled evidence. And evidence in the right hands was a scalpel that could cut through corruption like flesh. The checkpoint was gone. Not relocated, not renamed. Gone. Dismantled. The traffic cones removed, the cruisers reassigned, the arbitrary border between Decatur and Buckhead erased. The invisible line that separated black from white, poor from rich, policed from protected, it still existed in hearts and histories, but on this road, it had been scraped away. The road was just a road now. No predators, no prey, just people going home. A sedan passed a young black woman behind the wheel, no fear in her eyes, no tension in her shoulders. She didn't glance at the shoulder, didn't slow, didn't calculate the risk of driving through this space. She just drove. Cassandra nodded, not to the woman she was already gone, to the future, to the incremental, exhausting, necessary progress. She held the silk fragment up to the dying light. It caught the sun, glowing like embers. Then she opened her fingers. The fabric spiraled into the wind, tumbling end over end, dancing on currents she couldn't see. It rose, drifted, disappeared into the sunset like a prayer released. The dress was gone. The man who tore it was caged in a federal prison, learning that night has no end when you're buried alive in your own choices. The system that enabled him was bent, scarred, reformed, but not reborn. That was the truth they didn't show in movies. Justice wasn't a moment. It was maintenance, a constant, exhausting, necessary fight against entropy, against regression, against the gravity that pulled institutions back toward corruption. Tonight, though, on this highway where she'd been stripped bare, Cassandra Monroe allowed herself one small, private victory. She'd stood her ground. She'd refused to break. And when they'd ripped her apart searching for weakness, all they'd found was steel wrapped in silk, evidence wrapped in flesh. A woman who understood that sometimes you had to let them hurt you to prove they were capable of it. She walked back to her Carnot, the gray Camry, which was now sealed in an evidence locker at DOJ headquarters. A new one, black, unremarkable. The road stretched ahead, golden and infinite under the dying light. Somewhere in USP Atlanta, Derek Wolfe was eating dinner from a tray, wearing orange that would never come off, living in a 6x8 cell that had become his universe. Learning that badges don't follow you into federal prison. Learning that respect earned through fear isn't respect at all. But here, under the Georgia sky, Cassandra Monroe climbed into her car. The engine purred to life. The radio played something soft jazz, Miles Davis, the kind of music that understood that triumph and melancholy could occupy the same space. She pulled onto the highway. Traffic flowed around her, indifferent and equal. The sun sank below the horizon, but the sky didn't go dark. It ignited orange, purple, gold. The colors of endings that were also beginnings. The story hadn't ended. It had ignited 1,000 more. In courtrooms across the country, prosecutors cited U.S. versus Wolf as precedent. Victims found courage. Departments scrambled to reform before federal investigators arrived. One woman, one torn dress, one refusal to be broken, and the whole machine had trembled. Cassandra Monroe drove into the gathering dusk, vanishing into the flow of headlights and taillights, just another traveler on a road that was finally, slowly, becoming safe for everyone. The silk was gone. The predator was caged. The work continued. Justice, after all, was never finished. It was only ever beginning.